Personality disorders tend to represent maladaptive variations in each of the different approaches that we've looked at. Okay, so with the trait approach, it tends to reflect extreme polar ends of trait dimensions. So sometimes people end up at these, on the trait dimensions, at these extreme polar ends. I'll give you an example here. We're going to learn about, if you think about the continuum of dependency on other people, we're going to learn about a disorder that is extremely dependent on others. In fact, it's called dependent personality disorder. We're also going to be learning about one where it's extreme independence. They don't need other people at all or very little, and that one is called schizoid personality disorder. There can also be maladaptive variations in this biology, so the biological approach. And what we're talking about here is our maladaptive genes or hormones, maladaptive neurochemical levels would be another example. Okay? And in the psychodynamic approach, this one is interesting. These are extreme fixations and extreme emotions, generally coming from the unconscious, right? From the humanistic approach, we're talking, remember that that one really had needs and motives in mind. And so very extreme needs and motives. And then from the behavioral approach, oftentimes we see things like odd behavior. Another example would be lack of social skills. Okay? And then from the cognitive approach, maladaptive thought processes like it could be problems with attention, could be problems with interpretation, problems with memory or attitudes, could be extreme or unusual beliefs. Now, the personality disorders are organized under 3 clusters. And cluster A is characterized by odd and eccentric behaviors and or thought processes. Odd and eccentric. Cluster B is characterized by dramatic and erratic thought processes and or behaviors. Dramatic and erratic. And cluster 3, characterized by anxious and fearful thought processes or behavior. Anxious and fearful. And this brings us to cluster A. Cluster A. Now, before we continue on with these and go through each of the personality disorders that we're going to be covering in this class, I want to advise you to take really, really good notes on these. So you might want to have some extra paper handy. You might want to pause this and get out some extra paper. But you want your notes to be as complete as possible. Okay, so not just the information on the slide. That will not get you by. Okay, you're going to want to take notes on everything I tell you about these different disorders, even if it means pausing the video now and then to do so. Okay, that's one of the great benefits of having videoed lectures, is that you have the ability to do that. All right, that said, let's start here with paranoid personality disorder. So remember, we're under cluster A now. We're talking disorders that are characterized by odd and eccentric thought processes or behavior. With paranoid personality disorder, there is an extreme distrust and suspiciousness of others. And when I say others, I don't mean just strangers. Strangers are certainly included, okay? But everyone, so also acquaintances, also casual acquaintances, also colleagues, also family members, even a spouse, if there is a spouse in the picture. Okay? People with this disorder expect to be mistreated And so they tend to be defensive and always on the lookout. They oftentimes, if they have a partner, okay, or a dating relationship, they display pathological jealousy. So unwarranted suspicion and distrust of the other being faithful to them. Okay. They tend to be hypervigilant, always on the lookout, hypervigilant, afraid that others are out to get them in some way, very distrustful of persons, not just persons though. Forms would be another example, distrustful of forms, filling out forms, distrustful of websites, distrustful of any kind of avenue where they are asked for information about themselves. They tend to be distrustful of new technology that could be used especially for surveillance reasons, like maybe a GPS. Paranoid personality disorder. One of the most interesting cases that I've read about is a client who refused to sit in the theater directly in front of anybody else. So the immediate seats behind them had to be empty. And if they sat down and those seats filled, they would actually get up and move. And their fear was that the person sitting behind them would light up a cigarette lighter and light their hair on fire. Okay, so very odd kind of cognitive process there, very odd belief, fear. Now this second one, schizoid personality disorder, is very interesting. People who have this disorder show little or no interest in other people. They tend to be very detached from social relationships, so they tend to have social isolation. Okay? They really show restricted emotion. So what's called in psychology flat emotion. So very little or no emotion. There's a real lack of social skills, so there are a lot of things that we really take for granted. Like when someone comes up to talk to you, they're looking you in the eye, and that may not be true with someone who's schizoid. They might be looking over your shoulder instead. Somebody who's schizoid tends to usually not have close friends. Okay? And they tend not to show an interest in sex or most anything that would involve another person. So sex as far as it would involve another person, and most anything else that would involve another person. They tend to be loners. Their spare time activities, as you might guess, would be things that would not require partners, so solitary interests. Okay. They tend to be very indifferent to criticism or to praise. Just don't react to it. Okay. Very indifferent to criticism and praise. Now, oftentimes, I'm going to try to give you some pointers here, because oftentimes people get schizoid mixed up with the next one, schizotypal, coming up, and also from one coming up way down the road called avoidant personality disorder. Okay, the main thing that's going to help you keep schizotypal, okay, separate from schizoid, is going to be the mild schizophrenia symptoms that you see under schizotypal. Okay, keep that in mind, because you're not going to see that with schizoid. And the main thing that's going to help you keep this apart, teased apart from avoidant personality disorder, is that flat emotion, for one thing, because people with avoidant personality disorders, are really nervous. You don't see that with schizoid. But the other thing is that social isolation. Both disorders have that in common, but with schizoid personality, it's because they're not interested in other people. Okay? This is the way they prefer it. This is the way they want their life to be. This is very different with avoidant, okay, where their motivation to stay away from other people is that they really care about what other people think, and they're afraid, very afraid, of being judged negatively. So kind of a fear of criticism. And remember that schizoid personality, they don't even react to criticism. They could care less. Okay. Now, the third one under cluster A is schizotypal personality disorder. Okay. Very interesting one also. People with this disorder lack the capacity for close relationships. They show mild schizophrenia symptoms and a lack of social skills. People who have schizotype tend to be very anxious in social situations, very nervous. But when we say mild schizophrenia symptoms, we're talking about these four in particular: odd beliefs, usually along the line of magical thinking. Okay, so not paranoid, that would put them with paranoid personality disorder, but odd beliefs usually along the line of magical thinking. So it's not unusual for them to believe in luck, that they might carry some lucky item, or they might believe that they have really special powers, like clairvoyant powers or telepathic powers. Okay? Those all being examples of those odd beliefs. Another mild schizophrenia symptom that is not uncommon with schizotypal is unclear speech. Okay? And unclear speech, if you look at that symptom in schizophrenia, disorganized schizophrenia, what you see is usually, if we say two sentences in a row, they're related, right? Not necessarily the case with someone who's schizotypal. So it's like they expect you to follow their train of thought, but you're not getting the normal cues that you usually rely on to follow a conversation. Now with schizophrenia, that can be far more extreme. So for instance, with schizophrenia, it can be phrases within a sentence that don't seem to be related. Or in a really, really extreme episode of schizophrenia, it can become words within a sentence. So basically, word soup. Okay. Well, what we tend to see on the level of schizotypal is them jumping around from topic to topic, expecting you to follow along. And yet another mild schizophrenia symptom that is not uncommon with schizotypal is a lack of personal grooming. Now, some people get this mixed up with schizoid, as you know, and remember that the mild schizophrenia symptoms are what's going to tell you this is schizotypal. Okay? And sometimes, people get this one mixed up with paranoid personality disorder. But remember that the cognitive disturbances, the odd beliefs here, are more magical than distrust. And finally, sometimes people who remember schizophrenia from Psych 101 or have abnormal psych tend to think schizophrenia when they see this personality disorder. But there are no hallucinations